Which entertainment medium is the best way to tell a story? This week, the bonus rounds in Las Vegas at DICE, and we're talking to Ubisoft's Corey May and Telltale's Dan Connors as they debate the ways we experience narrative. Plus, can video games achieve a greater sense of immersion than film or TV? And if so, why? Find out what our expert panel says in this episode of the bonus round. Hey, welcome back to the bonus round from the DICE conference here in Las Vegas. I'm Jeff Keighley with Dan Connors, who's the CEO of Telltale Games, known for Back to the Future and The Walking Dead, and Corey May from Ubisoft. Guys, we've been talking about narrative in games, and I'm so excited about how story has become even more important to game makers, I think, over the past few years. There was a great debate here at DICE, though, between J.J. Abrams and Gabe Newell about storytelling in games versus movies, which is the best way to kind of affect people and tell a story. Corey, I'd love to get your sort of perspective on their points of view and player agency and sort of how you guys think about that inside of Ubisoft and your new studio, Alice.
I mean, I think that we are just now beginning to really start to dig deep into researching different methods for communicating narrative in the game.
Yeah.
And thinking back to the talk yesterday, to me, again, it comes back to that idea of there is no one way or right way. And so it makes me nervous when we start to try and compare the different mediums to one another. Like, I don't often hear people saying, no, reading a novel is better than watching a movie because you get to do X, Y, and Z. And I want us to move away from that because I feel like we fall into a trap when we become obsessed with this sort of competition between mediums. Yeah. So they're two different mediums. They have different strengths. They have different challenges. I wouldn't even say weaknesses. And we have to be okay with that. I think there's a lot that both mediums can learn from one another. But at the end of the day, they are two very distinct and different mediums.
I think it's a great point about the idea of like being inspired by great work in other mediums, but not trying to copy it. And I think Walking Dead's a great example of that show being what it is. I think you guys are inspired by some of the ideas in there, but you had the freedom to go off and kind of make the game you wanted to make in part because it's based on the comics. It's not like a literal translation of the TV show where you're trying to tell the episode story. You can do your own thing.
Yeah, and but I think to that point, I do think interactivity is going to creep into all entertainment on some level. And I think that it's going to enable new things inside of those mediums.
Well,
and it's always looked the other way.
I was going to say, we saw that even recently. I think CBS did a thing where it's like people could pick, between three different endings for Hawaii 5-0. And tweet, to pick it. And it's primitive ideas, but I like your point that, do you ever think about like how Walking Dead, the TV show, could be more interactive?
Yeah, I think I always think about everything from an interactive standpoint because that's what I've done my whole life. So, the idea that you can create a relationship with a character. A lot of people watch Walking Dead or play Walking Dead with with someone else who's watching at the same time. Yeah. And they're making the choices together. Yeah. When an event happens in The Walking Dead to a character, it's not just like you had a tender moment with that character at some point on film.
Right.
It's like you built a relationship with that character. That character is been part of your life for a while now. Yeah. And when something happens, it's hugely impactful. So I think that everything can have that element in it on some level. It's just how do you get it to the audience? Who's the audience? Who wants it? Why? It's all the kind of business stuff around it as things emerge. But it's going to be interesting as the new consoles come online and the media get closer together, on the new Xbox or the new Sony.
Yeah. And how do you think, Corey, that idea of interactivity, how does that interface with the the concept of storytelling in a narrative story where you have a 3-act structure and a resolution to a story?
But so again, I think we have to start thinking about moving away from those more traditional structures. When I think about the way we set up narratives in games, I think we're better served if we want to look for a model more towards books and TV shows because we're dealing with something that's far greater than a 90-minute time frame that's traditionally reserved for film. So we want to be able to spread it out. We want to be able to spend time with characters, and I think that just in terms of the place that interaction has, is that ideally becomes a tool to support whatever the themes or ideas that you're discussing within a game. Again, so that all these things are working together. So that moving through the world is part of telling the story, and not just hitting moments where the game shares story with you. The way the very active interaction becomes a part of the narrative, and so I think we're going to see a lot of stuff moving forward where we start to play with that. I thought it was really interesting what they did with Zombie U, the way that they tried to utilize the tablet, right? Yep. The act of looking down to loot was an attempt, I think, to mirror the idea of being distracted when you bend over to loot a body in real life. And so little things like that, I think, are gonna, are interesting. And the more ways that we can begin to play both with the technology and the way that we interact with what's on the screen, and have it support story rather than be a barrier in between, the player and the story, I think the more interesting things can become. Something for me that I'd love to see someone try and do again was there was an old Konami game called Lifeline.
Right.
You got a microphone in the box, and you had to scream at the woman on the screen. And that, to me, there was something really, really interesting there about, in terms of, bringing what was going on, on your screen, like into the living, like bringing these two things closer and closer together.
All right, guys, hold that thought for 1 second. We'll be right back here in the bonus round.